It is Locked On Jazz for the 8th of July. It's Ask LOJ Day. What's next for the Utah Jazz? What do you do if you're Ainge? How do we remember Rudy? When did we know he was going to be great? And all sorts of other fabulous questions that have come across. Plus, I've got a weekend debate for you around the barbecue with your buddies. It's all coming up on today's edition of Locked On Jazz. Pow.
You are Locked On Jazz, your daily podcast on the Utah Jazz. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every...
How are you? I'm David Locke, radio voice of the Utah Jazz, Jazz NBA insider. This is Locked On Jazz, your daily podcast on the Utah Jazz. Give you insight, expertise, geeky numbers, and hopefully making it way better to be a Jazz fan each and every day. Thanks so much for making Locked On Jazz your first listen of the day. We are free and available on all podcasting apps, as well as on YouTube, as well as at utahjazz.com. So thanks very much for tuning into the show. Appreciate you. I hope you've had a nice week and a great weekend planned. Here's a weekend debate for you, and then we'll get into all of the Ask LOJ questions that have been submitted. They're terrific. So anytime we kind of make a hypothetical debate, you're kind of adding a few pieces that are, you have to kind of buy into what I'm saying. So this is not 100% like factual debate against factual debate. But so the question yesterday was kind of the window is closed and what the window, and then I actually presented like what the window really was. And so what this question leads me to is, let's take two scenarios. And which would you rather have had for the Utah Jazz? And again, there's a few items in here that are pure assumption. So scenario one is that Rudy Gobert stays in Utah as a lifelong member of the Utah Jazz. We build him up. He's our own. He wins another 3 Defensive Player of the Year awards. And he retires a member of the Utah Jazz, and he's our guy the entire way through. We run through his 2 $40 million years. We re-sign him at a different number at that point, and he retires, and he's just a stalwart member of our community. And we actually never win more than 50 games. We're kind of always right around where we've been, which is 50, 51, 49, 48. We're good every year because we have Rudy, and his presence just immediately gives you, close to 50 wins. He starts to fade a little bit as he gets older, and our win numbers drop. Our roster turns over a great deal. We make the second round every now and then, but we maybe make one conference finals. We never make an NBA finals. And we have this great more run with Rudy that's probably another 5-6 years till he's 35, 36, and then finally he retires. And we've had a run. And that's scenario one. And there are some people out there who really believe that, like with Rudy Gobert, particularly at the salary he was going to be at, we couldn't have won a championship. That was not an option. We probably could never win a championship, that it was going to limit how great we could be. And so let's go with their school of thought, which has got some reason to it. And also that Rudy's, as we've talked about, postseason impact has been minimized the last few years. And the league seems to be, he contested 2 less shots last year. So there's some thoughts there. I'm not trying to prove it. I don't really care. It's more of a concept of a debate. So here's scenario one. Scenario one is that Rudy stays in Utah. That feels wonderful. We're all wearing 27 jerseys. We get a massive retirement party for him. We retire his number. He goes down as the 3rd greatest Jazz player of all time, but we never win more than 53, 54 games. On one year, we got a little hot. We were at 48 for some, depending if Rudy tweaks something, misses some games. And we make it out of the first round some of the time, maybe a conference final. The other scenario is we do what we did. We cut the cord with Rudy because we do feel he's hindering his contract, his style, his offensive inabilities, hinder your chance to win a championship. Make you good every year, but hinder your chance to win a championship. And instead, you unload him, you get all these draft picks, you're into a really tough circumstance right now, and you may or may not be able to retool it immediately, or you end up rebuilding. You have to go through the process. Like, you might not be good till by the time Rudy's contract would be actually over. Like, so like your 2027, 2028, 2029, I don't know, that seems long. But maybe, frankly, our first real dividend draft picks from the Minnesota pick might be 2027 and 2029, barring something going wrong. I expect them to be good next year and still be good in 3 years. So our first really good, like, marquee player may not be till 2027 or 2029. So how we've built, and then we add them. So you're not, and then you have this championship chance. Let's say the other one had 0 championship chance. This one's got a rebuild and some tough years, but you're watching your players and your excitement of the draft, and you're going through the process, and now you build it up, and you get one of these. You have a chance. Again, there's no guarantee here of just getting one of these stars and getting a marquee player and building that up into a championship opportunity. If all goes as difficult as it is, if all goes correctly. So that's your weekend debate. Which of those two, as a fan, would you rather have? Now, remember what you said after we lost in the first round at Dallas, because that's scenario one, kind of over and over and over again, with some little flips in there of winning 50 games. I as a play-by-play announcer, it's an interesting question, and actually one of our questions that we got today on Ask LOJ is how the quality of the team is. Like, I might take the first one. As an owner or a general manager or a front office or a head coach, I think I want the second. How about as a fan? What would you want as a fan? I think it's a really interesting debate. Again, the second one has no guarantees. It has a route to championship, or at least high level, but it has no guarantees. But the other one probably had a ceiling. So which of those two, as a fan, would you rather have? All right, the number one question that's coming at me right now is any chance on DeAndre Ayton? And before we get into all the Ask LOJ questions, I'll address this one. By the way, comment on YouTube. I've put a poll question up for you on which of those two would you rather have. Scenario one, the Rudy Gobert holds for 6 more years. And scenario two is we go through a retool, rebuild with a chance. Like, just a good weekend debate. And then you have to ask yourself honestly, if let's be honest, if you take the first one, are you actually willing to do that? And if you take the second one, how upset are you going to be in 30, 35 win seasons or 25 win seasons? It's fun. Like, good. So do that over the barbecue. Maybe you can sneak over Scott Gerard's house and get him to cook up some of his amazing burgers and all the other things he does, and then have that debate with him. I've never been invited, so I wouldn't know. I hope he's listening. So questions on DeAndre Ayton. And my first comment is I think it's unlikely. The first question I think you have to ask, one of the whole reasons you moved Rudy is you didn't want to be paying $40 million for a center. Do you want to be paying $40 million for a center in DeAndre Ayton? Do you want to be paying $40 million at some point for a center who there are questions of whether he likes the game or not? Like, that's kind of been the book on him since the very beginning, of whether or not he likes the game. There's all these kind of weird stories of him staying up all night playing games and video games and some of these kind of things that are questionable. And Phoenix is clearly, willing to move from a guy who's like helped them do some pretty amazing stuff. And then there definitely was an issue during the playoffs where, he and Monty got into it, and enough so that Phoenix is willing to move on. So, and he's really good. He's the number one pick of the draft. He's wildly talented. He's super good. And he can play offensively. He's not, you go put a little on him on a switch and he'll pin you and he'll score. And he wants the ball. So he's not as good as defensively as Rudy, but he actually got way better. So he's really, really good. So is there any chance the Jazz could get DeAndre Ayton? I had been told in basketball circles this week that there was supposed to be an offer sheet for him this week, and kind of a surprising one that would have blown up the Kevin Durant deal and was from a team you wouldn't expect it from, and it didn't come. Which starts to get interesting because there are only a few teams that actually can do something with DeAndre Ayton. And so one of two things is happening right now. One is that he actually wants to go to Brooklyn. his agent is holding up signing any offer sheets, trying to help facilitate the trade for DeAndre Ayton to get to Brooklyn. Okay, so that could be one. Two is that the other teams just have not offered the offer sheet yet. Like, for whatever reason, they have not come through. They either have gotten intel that has them worried, they have whatever is going on, and or they just are whatever it is, the teams have decided. The longer this goes on, if the second one is the reason, then the DeAndre Ayton to Utah possibilities increase by the day. Because one of two things also happens. One is that the number starts getting much lower. And then he has to decide whether he just wants out of it or what he's doing. And if the number's lower, it's an easier trade to make with Phoenix. And if Phoenix really is just done with him, and they just don't have a lot of options, you could then this suddenly becomes more viable. So the longer this goes on without Ayton getting an offer sheet, and again, in the basketball circles, yesterday or the day before was the day that we actually had all heard that he was getting something that was going to kind of surprise things, blow up the Durant deal, and do all sorts of, have a major impact around the league, and it didn't happen. And there just aren't that many teams that have cap space for DeAndre Ayton right now. Like San Antonio, Indiana, I mean, you can kind of run down the list. It's few and far between. So my quick take on it is, unless they're just the agents holding out for Brooklyn, is the second scenario is that the league is just not making a move on him. Every day is a larger possibility. You just have to, the Jazz have to figure out if they actually want to do it. So that's my quick one on that. Friday edition of the show is brought to you. We'll get to Ask LOJ coming up here in a second. A lot of really, really good questions coming your direction. One great one on whether there's a model of this in the past. And I'm not prepared for it, but I'm going to throw it out there. Today's show is brought to you by Murdoch Hyundai, located 4646 South State Street. My wife went down yesterday and test drove the Ioniq, which is the electric car that Hyundai has out there. And I think I'm about to buy my third Hyundai. Is that crazy? Holy smokes. Ever since I got to meet the Murdochs and then got to know the Hyundai brand, I'm like become a disciple, not only an advertiser, but a total disciple. We've got two Santa Fe's, and I think we're on the verge of going to get an Ioniq. It just drives really well, and it's got a bunch of safety features, and it's electric, and it's good for the environment. I can't put water in the Great Salt Lake, but that's something we should probably look into. So it is... I keep telling you about what's going on at Murdoch Hyundai, but I'm also telling you that I actually keep buying cars at Murdoch Hyundai because when I do the research, they come out to be the most price efficient on the market with the best safety values and all the things that you'd want when you buy a car. So head down to Murdoch Hyundai at 4646 South State Street or in Logan or in Linden. Feel free to email me first. Always best if you can tell me what store you want to stop by, and I'll set you up with a VIP meeting over at Murdoch Hyundai. Today's show is also brought to you by Truebill. On average, people are saving up to $720 a year with Truebill. It's the app that helps you identify and stop paying for subscriptions you don't need, want, or simply forget about. Companies make subscriptions hard to cancel. Truebill makes it incredibly simple. Just link your accounts, and Truebill will cancel your unwanted subscriptions in one tap, and your Truebill concierge will be there for you to help you cancel unwanted subscriptions so you don't have to. It's actually pretty great. It also tells you a lot about your spending habits, what you did each week, where you're spending your money. Depends how deep into it you want to go. It's pretty fabulous. Don't fall for subscription scams. Start canceling today at truebill.com/lockedonnba. Go right now to truebill.com/lockedonnba. That's truebill.com/lockedonnba. Thanks very much for making Locked On Jazz your first listen of the day. Locked On NBA, a 30-minute recap of the night in the NBA with the big stories, is a great and summer league action is a great way to catch up on the rest of the league. Also, Locked On Sports today. That's like my favorite show. All right, let's get to it. Let's see what we got here. Let's run to our questions. Dun, 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 dun. I got to change one thing on our graphics. Our first question on Ask LOJ comes in and says, from Bryce, since the Jazz are retooling, would it be a good time to take a risk on a guy like Jonathan Isaac? And should the Jazz go get him or a guy like him, young prospect with a high ceiling, come back from injury, maybe Boyan for Jonathan Isaac? Yes, I think this is really interesting. I saw this last night, and I have not done a great job of kind of digging into prospects like this. But with Paolo Banchero, it does seem like Orlando probably is interested in moving Jonathan Isaac. His injuries have been significant. And, whether or not he ever plans out, they paid him a bunch of money. So the problem is that he has a bunch of years left on his deal. But if we're going to be under the cap and we're going to be, in a rebuild, retool mode, then maybe it's a pretty good gamble. He's got 17.4 million this year, 17.4 next, and 17.4 the year after that. So yes, I think that's a absolutely good name to throw out there. You've got to do your research. You got to kind of figure out where he is as a player. But yes, I absolutely agree that is the type of player. There aren't a lot out there that are worth going to get. What is the path or timeline to being competitive? I don't expect there to be any move we can make to be truly competitive this year. So what moves would we make down the line for that? Can we do enough soon enough so Donovan stays or we don't risk another Hayward situation? This is from Wes Jenkins. It's hard. Like the free agents that are available, there's just nothing that moves the meter right now in free agents. Like the centers are DeMarcus Cousins, Hassan Whiteside, and Montrezl Harrell. So unsigned players are not going to fill our gaps. Feels similar to kind of one of Danny's early Boston teams that I think got around 40 wins, and then Danny started adding stars onto the team. He added Al Horford, then he added another piece, then he added Kyrie, then he added Kemba, and some worked and some didn't. There's no question Danny played with Larry Bird and Kevin McHale and coached, Charles Barkley, and like he knows the star value. He understands you're not piecing this together. Royce O'Neal's and Joe Ingles are wonderful players, but you're not winning anything big with them, right? They're complementary pieces, and we don't have enough of those pieces right now. What I think Danny's not willing to do is go overspend on complementary pieces that then hand ties you so that you're unable to go add those real pieces down the road. Like that's really, to me, what I'm seeing right now is, first of all, they got a bunch of draft picks for shots. They got some more movable pieces, but they're not about to go sign a 4-year contract to some player just to have a average player, but then you're also tied into him and lose some of your roster flexibility. The timetable and the path, I think, what they've done is they've built flexibility. And so it's a tricky question of when or how, and certainly keeping Donovan is vital in it. And if Donovan doesn't want to stay and it doesn't look like it can happen fast enough for Donovan, then you move Donovan and that sets your pace. If things become available in the process and Donovan shows, has a better year than he had last year and continues to show the development that a lot of people believe he can have, then you go add some pieces to him the same way Danny did in the past. This is a fabulous question. This will be my summer research. Zach Lancaster comes through again. He often does. Are there examples of teams that successfully rebuilt around a player by turning over the majority of the roster? Kobe's Lakers is the one that comes to my mind. Certainly, when they got the Pau Gasol trade. I don't know the answer to this. I've got to really think about this. And then the question is also, what do we think is successful? That kind of goes to the daily debate, or the debate for the weekend I gave you. I love this question. This is worth, some research on this. Is there an example of, taking an all-star caliber player, moving them, and then retooling? So Toronto with Kawhi Leonard probably would fall into this in that single year that they got that done. But usually these dynasties are kind of run through, one sole piece. You change the team around Stockton Malone, you change the team around Duncan, you change the team around Kobe. And so Donovan would have to be that single piece. This is a great question, Zach, and I don't really have an answer for it, but we'll continue to look into it. This is from Caden. What excites you the most about Will Hardy? I think the fresh voice is a nice thing. I think just watching them play Summer League, there was a little less just high pick and roll, a little bit more off-ball movement to get into things and get into actions that way. Almost felt a little bit like the early days of Quinn. I think just the newness of it, hard because, I've got close friends on that last staff that are no longer a part of this or not going to be a part of it. And so it's, I think change is hard. Change is uncomfortable. And for those of us that were deeply embedded, change is hard. But I think, you've got a young voice. You basically, hey, the fact of the matter is that Will Hardy was the pop heir apparent, right? And so you've got this guy who's supposed to be one of the rising stars of coaching, and you get to watch him the same way you get to watch your players develop. And you get to watch him put his stamp on the team, and you get a different team than what we had. And we'll play in a different style than we did in the past. And I do think, hey, let's, Quinn said it, they need a new voice. And so I think that's as exciting as there. If you were Danny Ainge, what would be your plan at this point? Do you feel like retooling or rebuilding is the best course given the landscape post Rudy trade from Grady? So I think this is the number one question for all Jazz fans. That's why I put it in here. I don't actually have a great answer for it, but I think this is the number one question. Like, where are we and what are we doing? And I think that's the whole point of the Gobert trade, is that you actually have multiple options. The Jazz sat in a draft room for the draft and had no picks and had no options and had no impact and just sat there for like a night and probably tried to play phone calls, but everybody else was going to the prom and everybody else had a date and everyone else was in a limo and everybody else had a dance partner, and the Jazz didn't get involved. They knew the party was going on and they were told they didn't get to go, and they called everyone to see if they can invitation. They didn't get in. And then free agency came around, which was the post party to the prom. And again, the same thing happened. Everyone liked the Jazz and they were nice, but they somehow just never found out where the party was and they didn't get to be involved. And now they've forced themselves into the party. And so what they were doing was they were sitting there before with a roster that wasn't working, that hadn't broken through, that either had the 1 year blip or not. My greatest concern the day Quinn resigned was whether or not Quinn had been giving us, 5 to 8 to 12 wins a year just with coaching. Well, maybe Danny agreed with that and suddenly said, this roster is just not that solid and we can't seem to change it. And so we've got to give ourselves some different routes. And you're right. Retooling and rebuilding are the two routes, and they're very different, but they're both options right now. We can use our draft picks to go bring somebody in. We can go sit on our draft picks. We can trade Don and go get more draft picks. We can try to fiddle with Mike and Boyan and the pieces we have on the roster right now to see if we can fill some other spots. And so there's just a multitude of options. And I think what Danny is allowing, rather than being particularly processed, step 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 has to be this way, I think he's allowing kind of the world to come to him a little bit on this, which is certainly a different situation than the Jazz were in before, because they just didn't have any options at all. So the fact that there's this uncertainty is different, but it might be the whole point of what the Jazz just did. Today's show is brought to you by betonline.net. More Locked LOJ coming up, by the way, or Ask LOJ. BetOnline.net is your number one source for all betting needs and sports information. Find all the latest sports developments, league reviews, news, including the Major League Baseball. Bunch of fun futures in the NBA right now. BetOnline is your continued source for all your sports wagering information, including live betting, esports, and more. BetOnline.net remains the best spot for all your sports scores, podcasts, and news. The NBA futures are fun. You actually probably can get in on the Wimbledon end. By the way, the pitchers duel, I love this every day. I don't know if you guys care about this. You might think it's silly. Is at 7. There's about 6 games at 7.5 today. So I have no good pitchers duel for you to jump on. NBA odds, you can bet summer league games. So the Lakers are a 5.5 point favorite over the Suns in summer league games tonight. I really cannot believe that we've reached that point, but good for them. Celtics are now the odds on to win the favorite. The Suns are no longer. That's changed, and it's kind of jumbled. Celtics at plus 600, Bucks plus 625, Warriors at plus 650, Suns at 650, Clippers at 700, Lakers are at 1,000, Heat are at 1,200, 76ers are at 1,400, Brooklyn at 2,000, Denver at 2,000, Toronto at plus 2,000, Dallas at plus 220, Memphis at plus 220, Minnesota at plus, not 220, 2,200 for all those. Atlanta at plus 6,000, the Jazz at plus 10,000. I have a thought on that I'll share with you here in just a second. That is betonline.net. Back for a second to all those odds. It's pretty interesting to me that right now, if you look at it, the West, they're projecting the Warriors as 1, Suns 2, Clippers 3, Lakers 4. Okay, whatever. Denver 5, Dallas 6, Memphis 7. Memphis and Minnesota 8. So Dallas, Memphis, Minnesota are 6, 7, 8. So they only have one of those teams making the teams that make the biggest moves of the offseason. The Minnesota Timberwolves, they have projected as a 6, 7, 8, which would not be bad for us in draft. And then they have the Pelicans at 9, by the way, who just gave Zion the max. In the East, and so, I think Minnesota will be higher than that, maybe not be able to win a championship, and probably be in the top 6. But here's this massive move they make for win now, and the championship odds have them tied for 6th in the West. In the East, you have Boston is 1, Milwaukee is 2, Miami is 3, 76ers at 4, Brooklyn at 5, Chicago at 6, Atlanta at 7. Here's Atlanta, put all the chips in. DeJounte Murray deal. Their odds on projection is a possible play-in game. And then Cavaliers are at 8, Hornets are at 9, Knicks are at 10. Knicks go all in for Jalen Brunson, and they're at 10. They're the last play-in team. It's pretty interesting to me that this is kind of where that these teams all put that much in, and then that's what they're getting right now. Corey asks on #AskLOJ, what are your thoughts on international guys seeming more likely to stay in markets? Gobert, Jokic, Giannis, Duncan, Dirk. Interesting. Dame Lillard, Steph Curry stayed too, right? So there have been very few players that have stayed. Jokic has stayed, Giannis has stayed, Duncan stayed, Dirk stayed. Right now there's 4. And because we traded Gobert, so there were 4 or 5. So there was the guys that have stayed right now that have signed second contracts that have made are Giannis, Gobert, would have been Gobert, Jokic, Dame, and Steph. So 2 of the 5 are American. 2 of them have won titles, frankly. Rudy ended up, and who knows on Rudy? For all we know, Rudy would have at some point voiced something. So really we have 4. 2 of them are international. 2 of them are not, and 2 of them have won titles. I kind of think winning the title is the bigger one in there. If the Jazz can't get anything for Bojan and Mike prior to the Rudy trade, how can they rebuild around Donovan? How can they get quality wings as a Donovan trade coming? So 2 things. One is I think what you might be asking for Bojan, Mike, or something of that nature could be a little different now than what you were trying to do before if you were really trying to rebuild to win with Donovan and Rudy. Now you're looking for a little bit of a different package. So that might open up the doors. By the way, both Bojan and Mike are super good. So you might just decide to keep them. Because they're both really, really good. Mike and Donovan are small in the backcourt. That was a problem last year. But Mike had a top 30 NBA players regular season last year. Let's not kind of forget that along the way. He was super good. I do kind of agree on the 6-1, 6-1 thing being a problem, but they're also, not everything can be perfect. So my answer to that is I think it opens up a little bit. And yes, there is a possibility that a Donovan trade could be coming. There's really no reason to do a Donovan trade for 12 months though. If you really don't have routes and the best move for the organization, exactly as was the case with Rudy, it was to trade him. We'll have to do that. And that's not great. That's the reality of this business, though. Do you believe the organization will retire Rudy's jersey? Is there a petition we can sign and get in front of Ryan Smith to make this happen? Ben Combs, I don't think there's a need for a petition. I think we'll retire Rudy's number. It just won't happen until he's finished his career. The only thing that would change that would be if Rudy goes to Minnesota and they win 2 or 3 titles or win a title and he becomes kind of really known as a Timberwolf. Then in some way do you not retire his number? That'd be sad. If he has the heyday of his career in Minnesota and so that he really is remembered as a Timberwolf, not a Jazz player, then maybe, you don't retire the number. It's funny how if a player finishes their career with you, you're very likely, if Jeff Hornacek had his career with Utah, but then had his next career with Philadelphia and Phoenix, I wonder whether we would have retired his number. Right? We retired his number a little bit because he retired with us, and then you tribute the retired number. So there is a funky thing. So it's not a guarantee, but I do think it seems likely. What are the main holes in the roster as it stands right now, and can we fill those holes with free agency still, or is your only option more trades? There's not much left from Tyler Galt, I think. There's not much left in the free agent market. It's barren right now. Your free agent centers are Montrezl Harrell, LaMarcus Aldridge, Frank Kaminsky, who I actually think is okay, DeMarcus Cousins, Hassan Whiteside, Dwight Howard, Tristan Thompson, Greg Monroe. I mean, there is a Zeller available, and we have never had a Zeller or a Plumlee, which is rather remarkable. Forwards that are unsigned: Carmelo, Melvin Frazier, who is a defensive guy who can't really shoot, Lance Stevenson, Mike Muscala. I actually think he's fine. Jordan Nwora is a nice player. He's only 23. I thought the Bucks re-signed him. He's restricted. That's why. Jeremy Lamb's floating out there. Like, these are not, Nima Bjelica, I think, still unsigned. We don't really need another guard, but Dennis Schroeder is out there. We probably don't need that. Etuan Moore is out there. Probably slowed down. Probably don't need that. So the free agent market's pretty sparse at this point, which would lead me to mean you're doing something with trades. The biggest manhole cover everyone's talking about is center. I do wonder whether or not a Jared Vanderbilt, Walker Kessler combination actually can just solve your center minutes and then you're just playing a very different style than what we're used to. Walker Kessler might be able to play. We'll see in the summer league how he looks. But it's not like if you just ask him to drop, he's not getting smaller, and set picks and roll, he might have a chance to be able to, he might have a chance to do something and be able to play a little bit. And then if Vanderbilt can play center in the way he did, it's really what he did in Minnesota, then maybe you've got most of your center minutes. Now we're just talking like wings and power forwards, and we're really short in that category. What are the moments you first realized that Rudy Gobert in the number 27 pick of the 2013 draft was a rotation player, then a starter, then an all-star, then finally a Hall of Famer? Great question, but I can't do it off the top of my head. There was the day in Dallas where I think he 2020'd. I remember being on the bus leaving and being like, oh my gosh, what do we have? Like that's the kind of memory. Thurl Bailey called it earlier. You should all at Thurl Big T Bailey on Twitter and tell him I'm giving him credit for this. But he called that Rudy was special really early. So, when someone of that caliber and that basketball knowledge and acumen suddenly says to me, like, I think Rudy's special, you suddenly do decide, like, oh, that's an interesting concept. I better look at this. And then you just started to see it, right? Night in and night out. And I think the other one was when Gordon Hayward left and we were still great. And suddenly Rudy was the one that was the connector between the two, would be the one that kind of gave me the idea that this guy was really, really fabulous. From Steven, we all know Stockton Malone are 1-2 in terms of franchise impact. Who goes after them? Would Gobert be the third? Sorry, I'm in my mid-30s, so the 90s is really my starting reference point. No, that's fine. I think so. Like, I think at this point, Darren is probably the third. But I think Rudy is probably, with the defensive player of the years and some other aspects, might turn out to be kind of in retrospect, we put him at the third. If Donovan were to sign another contract here, he certainly would go to 3, if not higher. I know it seems blasphemous, but you never know. I don't think Boozer gets there, and then the early New Orleans era never kind of plays into that. AD was really good. Like, Adrian Dantley probably deserves some conversation in here of being the third best Jazz player, but right now it's probably an Adrian Dantley, Darren Williams, Rudy Gobert conversation, and it seems like a fairly fun one. That can be your next weekend debate. Do you get to call the All-Star game? Nope. As a local radio host or play-by-play announcer, do you know if you'll be involved with All-Star at all? I hope so. I don't know. Unrelated, do you think Rudy will shoot at least 1 3 in his career? Yes, I think Rudy will shoot some threes in Minnesota. I think Rudy will have the rule of the roost in Minnesota. I don't know. I hope to be involved play-by-play. I hope I can be a great ambassador to the organization, to all the people that are in town. Maybe I'll take them all skiing. I'll be hosting the ski outings for all the media and those people. Have you seen anyone on the Jazz Summer League from Braden that will be a good addition to our current roster? I thought Simonic was really interesting last night. Was it Borasa? No, that's not right. But Simonic, Serbia, was one of the top European players. He played the EuroLeague Next Gen tournament when he was 18 years old or 17 years old, and he was the MVP. So that would say like you're the next star of Europe. And then he's plateaued since then. And I thought he was interesting last night. I thought Palmer showed some athleticism in the second night that was elite over everyone else. Caboclo had a good summer league game. He really should. I mean, he's been in the NBA for 7 years. So I'm not as excited about that as everybody else is. And then I think there's like some intricacies to the game of whether he's in the right spot all the time. He was really good last night. Like, he was the best player on the floor. I'm not trying to minimize that, but like, he should be the best player on the floor. He was drafted 7 years ago. Jared came out with a good line by the end of last night, and he's searching. Like, he came out, I thought he played really well early, moving the ball, and we hit a bunch of shots, which were off his actions, and then he kind of went into trying to score for himself, and I think he's trying to find himself in a lot of different ways right now that I think are probably a little difficult for him. Final question on Ask LOJ. When the Bucks come to Salt Lake City, can you introduce my friend Matthew W. Gary Fox to Joe Ingles? I can almost guarantee he's not a stalker and won't stab him. Almost. Have a great weekend, everyone. Talk to you soon. This is Locked On Jazz, part of the Locked On Podcast Network.